From bad to worse. Maybe. Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles on Sunday against the Bengals, putting an end to his season or more. It's not exactly a secret that Watson has been absolutely terrible this season, and really the whole time he's been on the Browns. But they sold out, they traded for him, and they gave him an insane deal they can't get out of without it really hurting. So the Browns have essentially been forced to start him no matter what because he's making so much money. And now he's going to get paid a ton of money while he's just hurt. And it really is seriously time to wonder if he ever plays another snap for the Browns. Now, a graphic warning, this was a really ugly injury. It was a lot like the Aaron Rodgers Achilles snap last year. You can just see the snap, and it is pretty clear his season's just over, just like that. It was on the first play after the 2-minute warning, and to make it worse, it was non-contact. He was just trying to run, and it snapped. He fell right to the ground, clearly in pain, and the cart came out, and he was pretty clearly emotional. He was not actually playing totally awful before he went down, which has been rare. He was actually 15 of 17 for 128 yards. The Browns ended up losing 21-14, and they ended up having to play 3 different quarterbacks despite only having 2 active. Once Deshaun Watson got hurt, Dorian Thompson-Robinson came in, who was the backup. He hasn't been the backup this year. It's been Jameis Winston, but my guess is the Browns got so tired of fans chanting for Jameis that they didn't even give them the option of him. Then DTR got hurt, and Jameis had to come in as the emergency quarterback. It was about as messy as you can imagine. Kevin Stefanski did say the Browns fear that Watson did tear his Achilles like everyone thought, and you do have to legitimately ask the question, will the Browns be better without him? And the answer is probably yes. Deshaun Watson has been absolutely terrible this year. Coming into the game, he had the worst QBR in the league at 22. Yes, that is lower than Will Levis by a bit, and way worse than even Jacoby Brissett, who was bad enough to get benched and was the 3rd worst QBR in the NFL. Will Levis is literally a laughingstock every week, and yet Deshaun Watson feels like he's even been worse somehow. He's had just a 1.2 EPA this year. Levis was 0.9, and every other QB has had at least over 8 expected points added. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that those are 2 of the worst quarterbacks in the league right now, Levis and, of course, Deshaun Watson. But now it's just Will Levis's crown. Through 6 games, Watson went 1-5. They're now 1-6, and they have the argument clearly for the worst team in the NFL. Watson completed 61.3% of his throws for 1,020 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions coming into the game. On the ground, he had rushed just 29 times for 148 yards and had a touchdown and 2 fumbles. He was playing really bad through 6 games, but he did play in 7 total this year, with Sunday's game included, which is the most games he's played for the Browns and the most he's played in a season since 2020. Again, that's just 7 games. The last time he played more than 6, we were in a pandemic. He didn't play in 2021. He was just on the commissioner's exempt list. Then he was traded to the Browns in one of the most perplexing bad decisions you'll ever see a team make. He was well on his way to being a Falcon, and man, it seems like Atlanta could not have dodged a bigger bullet. Instead, Watson went to Cleveland, who ended up giving up on Baker Mayfield, sending him over to the Panthers, and all the while, the Browns had to give up 3 first-round picks, a 3rd, and a 4th just for Watson and a 6th-round pick back. It was a terrible trade. It came with a 5-year, $230 million deal, both the largest contract and most guaranteed money in NFL history, all of course for a guy who was facing a ton of sexual assault allegations, and they just kept piling up. Forget the entire bad decision of giving a crazy contract to a player that has just gotten hurt constantly and not even been good, but even them just turning their back on Baker Mayfield, who really helped change the culture in Cleveland and is now the true franchise guy in Tampa Bay. But the simple morals of trading for a guy dealing with a ton of sexual assault allegations just alone is insane. After not playing at all in 2021, Watson was then suspended for 6 games that ended up going up to 11 games after the NFL and NFLPA made a settlement. He went a very, very long time without actually playing in a game, and that long really makes it hard to get right back into the swing, and that was pretty evident. It took a minute to get back into it, and he just never really did get back into it. In his first season back, he played in 6 games. He had a 58.2 completion percentage with 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, touchdowns and 5 interceptions. At the very least, you were able to chalk it up to rust and maybe he'd be able to turn it around. Clearly, that's not what happened in the slightest. And he started off really bad again last season. Again, he played in just 6 games. That time was because he actually suffered a shoulder injury. He ended up undergoing surgery. But before he went down, he completed 61.4% of his passes for 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That year was different though, because he went 3-3 in 2022. And then in 2023, the Browns were 5-1. It was a great start, but it felt like it was all in spite of Deshaun Watson. Even with how bad he was in his first 2 years in Cleveland, and like he was really bad, this season's been even worse. He had a 40.4 QBR in 2020, 43.7 last season. This season has been a cool 22. He's been that much worse. He's been by far the worst quarterback in football. And if you're the Browns, you can't just admit you're on the wrong side of the worst trade in NFL history. You have to try to wait it out, especially when you look at the contract and how long they're going to be stuck with him. The contract situation for the Browns when it comes to Deshaun Watson is brutal. There's just no way around it. Mike Florio broke it down, and this is how bad it is. It's ugly. For the most part, the Browns' options are to let him stay on the roster and maybe play, which is probably not the best thing for the team, or they can keep him on the roster to not play despite how expensive he'll be. The Browns have to pay him $46 million for each of the next 2 years, and the cap hits are awful. He's going to be a $73 million cap hit next season and in 2026. And if he's released or traded, you can tack on $26 million to that. If he gets cut before June 1st, the cap hit would be $173 million, which is absurd. And even if he's cut after that, it'll only be $73 million. And then in 2026, it'll be almost $100 million. There is literally not a good option for the Browns. And now he might not even play in week 1 because of an Achilles injury. And honestly, that might result in the Browns being a better team because he isn't out there. Anyone who has watched the Browns this season has already well figured out that they would be better off with Jameis Winston starting. Without a doubt at this point, the Browns trading for Deshaun Watson and giving him a massive, fully guaranteed deal is going to go down as one of the worst decisions in NFL history. And the real question is, can we actually name anything worse? Not only was it an awful moral decision for a guy who has very clearly been hated for obvious reasons, but the guy they gave up on to get him, Baker Mayfield, is now playing the best football of his career for the Buccaneers. Now the Browns are stuck paying for a bad player who no one really likes, has been terrible, and frankly hasn't even been able to stay healthy, which ultimately might be better because they aren't forced to throw him out there each week because Jim Haslam is making sure Kevin Stefanski plays him no matter what. Haslam can't admit he made one of the worst decisions in NFL history, but he did. You also do have to wonder how much of Deshaun Watson's poor play has just been mental. There hasn't even been a flash of that guy we once saw dominate and was so much fun to watch on the Texans. That guy's gone.
Anakin. Anakin's gone. I am what remains.
What do you want from her?
Just a massage.
You know, I think he obviously went through a lot mentally with all of his lawsuits and all that stuff derailing him for a good bit. Add in the fact that he's now had back-to-back season-ending injuries after a long suspension, and it's been pretty hard to actually gain any momentum. You never want to see anyone get injured. At the end of the day, that's just being human. It is sad to see anyone get hurt. And at this point, I really do think we could never even see Deshaun Watson play again. And the Browns, unfortunately, are just going to have to live with the fact that they made the worst decision in NFL history.